Now, my fellow students, check out this upside down Toblerone. Or how about this spaceship lookalike? I mean, it's literally got babies climbing all over it. No joke, this is true, and you can find out about it in this video. Or how about this UFO, literally nicknamed the UFO Bridge by the locals. And of course my favourite, Jested Tower in Liberec, Czechia. One of the most magnificent structures of the previous regime. And of course, your usual commie blocks, which we're also going to just gloss over a little bit in this episode. And as you probably noticed something about these structures, they are all brutalist. And, as you also probably noticed, Czechoslovakia was not a stranger to brutalist structures. And in this episode, we're going to deep dive into brutalist structures of Czechoslovakia.
S láskou vždy k smedným ústam strún sláčik priloží noc čo noc.
Now, before we head into this video, I just really wanted to say really quick thank you to all of your brilliant comments and stories you've written in the previous two videos, and I really appreciate your support. And subscribe to the channel because there's going to be so many more historic videos on similar topics and also other Eastern European countries. Poland, Hungary, probably even Yugoslavia at some point, etc. So subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and let's head into the video, guys. We have to talk about Zizkova Veja, or Zizkov Tower, located in Prague, Czechia, and also it's specifically Zizkov region of the city. Now, it's an absolute behemoth, and I was actually in Czechia, in Prague last year, and standing right next to this behemoth, you can really sense the actual sheer size of it, and it really triggers my megalophobia as well, by the way. It was built in 1985. It's 216 meters tall. And in the year 2000, an absolute mad lad by the name of David Cherny has added fiberglass structures of babies climbing the tower. Yes, I know it's very bizarre, but people actually liked it. And in the year 2001, they made these permanent part of the structure. Now, if you live in Prague, what do you think of these babies climbing the tower? And where's the idea originally come from? Because I couldn't find anything on the babies. What about the reception? What did people think of this absolute beast being built in their cities? Right next to their apartment buildings, by the way, because this is in a pretty residential area. Now, obviously, being of the previous regime in Czechoslovakia, they couldn't really critique it, could they? Because the communists wouldn't really be happy about that, and they would not allow them, and probably throw them in the gulag as well, so they wouldn't be able to. And it's actually got a cafe, as far as I'm aware, and like a little restaurant in one of these pods. Let me know if you've been there, let me know what you think of it, and let me know what the interior is also looks like, because I've been near the tower, but I haven't actually been inside because I was not prepared to pay the money to go up through some elevator. I mean, come on. Now, this one's for all of you Bratislavans out there, you're going to love this one. Slovenský rozhlas, or Slovakia Radio headquarters. This massive upside-down triangle was actually finished in 1983, but the building originally started in the 1960s, in the liberal 1960s, which was a very different time to the 1970s, which came after, with a new prime minister and the tightening of the communist regime coming in. So I think they were very lucky that the idea came up and they started building in the 1960s, because I don't think this would have been allowed in the decades to come. And now it's one of the most iconic buildings in Bratislava, and actually it's been registered, a grade registered as a historical building, which means it cannot just be taken down ever now. And I think over the years, Bratislavans and Slovakians have really sort of come to appreciate this building and what it really stands for. It's actually made of steel, not concrete. And it's got a huge concert hall inside, and the second largest, I believe, organ in Slovakia. After mine, of course. Let me know what you think of it in the comment section below. Let me know if you live in Bratislava, or if you live in Slovakia, and if you've been to see the building. Let me know your thoughts, even if you haven't, and you're just looking at the images or the videos on the screen right now, and you're looking at it and thinking, who the hell has come up with this mad idea?
Co si to dovoluješ, ty čuráku?
Now let's take a quick little break from these outlandish crazy structures, and let's look at probably the most conformist, the most well-known type of a building, type of a living accommodation in the previous Eastern Bloc. Obviously, talking about commie blocks. Now look, commie blocks is what people used to call them in the West because of the propaganda, etc. But these were actually called panelag, or they called panel, concrete building, because they were actually made of concrete panels which were put together like a Lego, which was actually very smart at the time, because as you know, after World War II, the West was building a hell of a lot of housing, whereas the East came up with this idea of a very smart design and very smart pieces being put together for a lot less money and being able to house a hell of a lot more people. When I was born, I lived in a commie block, and I grew up in a commie block as well, and specifically Kahanoce in Slovakia. As you probably don't know, since these weren't so popular in the Western world, It was actually a pretty cheap and inexpensive way of building a mass housing after the destruction of the World War II. They were made out of actual wall panels, and they basically put them together like a little giant Lego. Now, just like with everything else under previous regimes, there's problems, okay? There is definitely problems. Now, first one of these problems is the seams between these panels, okay? The seams that essentially super glue them together. They have to be redone every few years because it's made out of these rubbery, sticky material which does start cracking after a while. And you can probably see this on some of the older ones which haven't been renovated and resealed. Another one is concrete also has half-life of 100 years, which means that there's a hell of a lot of money and a hell of a lot of time having to be invested into making these buildings survive for as long as possible, because obviously they don't want to be taken down with a hell of a lot of people having, you know, their investments, essentially their flats in these apartments, and the state wouldn't have the money to be able to just take them down and repay the people, because obviously the politicians are greedy and they have all the money and they wouldn't just give it back to the people. Another one is you can hear very loud conversations of your neighbours from above you and sometimes from below you as well. My personal experience, if your apartment is right under a metal roof as well, in the summer it's like a sauna as well. And as I've just mentioned, you can also hear neighbours very well. I remember growing up, we used to live on the 3rd floor, and I could always hear the argument of my friend who used to live above me on the 4th floor with his dad, and they could probably hear mine as well, to be fair. But yeah, there's a lot of iconic moments where from films of the period where people would get a broom and they would just start smashing on the roof, on the ceiling of their apartment, so that they would let their neighbours know to just keep it down, keep it quiet.
Quiet! Keep it down up there!
So yeah, the walls were paper thin because of this reason.
What did I just say? I'm calling the police!
Because of a lot of shafts for the toilets and for the piping were obviously shared, so a hell of a lot of noise would actually come through when you were sat on the toilet and someone was above you. So yeah, mental madness. There's a hell of a lot of negatives to them, but I think there's also this community feel which these areas had. I mean, I remember even when I go back to Slovakia now, or when I'm in Czechia, and I think you see the families interacting together, and you see the kids playing in the park and the parents talking to each other a lot more, and they used to have these little corner shops at the end of each apartment, so obviously a little self-sustainable shop, and the people didn't have to drive too far, they would just go to their little shop. And the very smart thing was that each one of these like areas, okay, the ones that were properly thought out and planned, because as times went on, as the regime went on, in the 1990s, the planning was nowhere near as advanced as it was in the 1960s and 70s when they first started building these estates. And I know this because my grandparents live in one in my home city of Košice, which was properly built and planned. It had its parking, hell of a lot of parking, and enough public transport in the area, bus stops, trams, etc. Enough roads and the width of the roads to accommodate for the cars and the amount of cars that people are going to be owning in the future. And it had the shopping centres, and it had a hospital in the area, whereas hell of a lot of the other ones are lacking these facilities, and they had to, essentially, the people had to leave their estate to go to a hospital, to go to a shop, which was a bit counterproductive because it was meant to be a self-sustainable ecosystem. Now, gotta have a sip of water. Now, let's move on to my personal favourite in this video, which is Jested Tower, which is located in central northern Czechia, a little bit close to the German border, and it's absolutely unbelievable. It blows my mind. Even the story behind it, which I'm about to tell you right now, is absolutely mind-blowing for the time. It's an engineering marvel. Now, you won't believe it here, but they were the first people in the world to use a mass damper to keep the tower from leaning in the high winds. Nobody has actually done that before, and Hubacek, who was the designer of the tower, came up with the idea to use old shock absorbers from a car in a near scrapyard, which incredible ingenuity at the time, but you know, he had to work with what they've had at the time. Now, Karol Hubacek was the only person in Czechia or Slovakia, the only architect who has ever received this prize. No one else has ever received a prize as such high regard before. And do you know what the saddest thing is? The current regime didn't even allow him to go and collect the prize. That's how spiteful and horrible some of these people were in the regime. Although the sad thing is that in 1969, Gustav Husak, who came into the power, was a super communist, and he didn't like Hubacek or his idea, so he basically confiscated his passport so that he couldn't fly to Argentina to go and collect his prize. And he wasn't even invited to the grand opening and had to sneak into his own bloody design. How did this all come about? Let me tell you. in the 19th century and in the 20th century, there actually used to be this sort of like a wooden cabin on top of these mountains, and they've actually burned down in the early 1960s because, as far as I understand, the housekeeper of this hotel at the top of the mountain in the winter of the early 1960s, 1962 I believe it was, he tried to heat up some of these pipes, and obviously these old cabins being built out of wood, he used a blowtorch to try and heat up these pipes from freezing, and he set the whole thing on fire essentially. And so the regime had to replace the tower. So they've had some architects trying to come in with some ideas, and basically what they required of them was to have one radio tower and some sort of building around it to house it. So they wanted two buildings, where this absolute mad lad, Karol Hubacek, came up with an idea to incorporate the hotel in the antenna tower, which mind-blowing at the time. And I think a hell of a lot of people who went over to the tower at the time when it was first opened in 1973 would have looked back on the liberal, peaceful, a lot more free times of the 1960s and looking at the interior with a nostalgic view, basically, because the 1970s in Czechoslovakia were a lot more closed down and they were a lot more strict in all the regulations through the Communist Party, tightening down all the freedom of people essentially. Now I would absolutely love to try and visit this tower, Jested Tower, at some point this year. Let me know if you've been there or if you've seen it in person. It's one of those structures that's always fascinated me across Czechia and Slovakia. And if you want to see that video of me visiting the tower, drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, structure number 4 for the Bratislavans. You're going to love this one as well, I'm not going to lie. We've got the UFO Bridge, which literally that's what they've nicknamed it at the time, and it's a spinning cafe built on top of a bridge officially called the SNP Bridge, which stands for Slovenské národné povstanie, which is basically like a Slovakian national resistance against the naughty cross Germans at the time. Now, it was built in 1972 and was the second bridge over the Danube River, which is actually the second largest river in Europe after the Volga. Now, we must just gloss over the reception of people and what they thought about it at the time in the 1970s when this was first erected, and I'm talking about the bridge.
Oh my God!
A significant section of the old town below, which included nearly all of the Jewish quarter, was demolished to create the roadway that led to it. And a very interesting thing is that parts of the historic city walls were actually unearthed during the constructions of this, and it must have been the parts of the Austro-Hungarian kingdom. Now, in my hometown of Košice, we've actually had one of these brutalist structures which is really flexing its brutalist muscles with no windows or a very minimum amount of windows and absolutely no colours, basically just grey concrete. And it used to actually house a Czechoslovakian shopping centre called Prior of the previous regime. And if you look at Prior and the sort of buildings they used to be housed in, they were all pretty much brutalist structures. I'm not sure whether that was just something they've unanimously agreed on or whether that was just something random. Now it's a Lidl, I believe. When I was a little kid it used to be a Tesco, but that was before Britain has gone through recent economic self-sabotage and Tesco had to pull out of many countries or cities in Europe and sell out many of their branches. I have a very good friend from a city of Banská Bystrica, central Slovakia, and a shout out if you're watching, by the way, brother. And they've got this very odd raw concrete structure with no colour or nothing at all, as per usual with these brutalist structures. And it was actually built to commemorate SNP, as hell of a lot of other statues and buildings in Slovakia were at the time. And yeah, I think it's just a perfect depiction of brutalism. It's built in the style of an old folklore hat, which I'll put on the screen now. And I'm not actually sure what's on the inside, but I'll try and put some shots on the screen right now. And again, it's another one of those that I'd love to visit and go and see. Let me know your opinions on these in the comment section below. Do you like them? Do you live in a city that has multiple of these? Do you live in a country that even has any? Because as far as I understand, there are some countries which have none. And yeah, if you like this sort of video and if you want to see another second part of brutalist structures, because there's a hell of a lot more. For example, Straho Stadium, the largest stadium in the world ever built, used to house over 200,000 fans in it. Drop a like on this video, let me know in the comment section below, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out either. So, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in a bit.